Hi everyone, this is our channel, Meet the Real Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
Love what you do until you can do what you love. This is a famous quote that inspires people to seek out their dream job. I heard that quote at school before I graduated and entered the working world. What's that, you ask? Was I successful in achieving my dream? Well, I came this close. Let me tell you about it. My name is Max and I'm 19 years old. Poverty and I are intimate friends and constant companions. I live in one of the poorest neighborhoods in my city. Most of the local citizens work at the seaport. The rest of us, we make a living by scavenging through and collecting rubbish. But I wasn't just an ordinary rubbish collector. No, sir, I was a specialist in that field, like my dad before me. Dad taught my brothers and me how to do it expertly. This is how it worked. Factories liked to use recycled materials to reduce the cost of buying new materials, so we would go to the city rubbish pile and separate out materials into different piles, such as plastics, glass bottles, milk cartons, tin cans, and so on. Then we would sell those materials to factories for reuse in making their products. This recycling process saved the factories a ton of money, but unfortunately, that didn't translate into a ton of money for us rubbish collectors. I had a dream one day of opening my own factory and just sitting back and watching the money flow in. When I told Dad that, he told me that good fortune only happens for a select few people. After hearing those words, I went to bed and dreamed about my future factory. Little did I suspect that my dream might actually come true someday. One day after working late collecting rubbish, while on the way home, I suddenly heard voices coming from a large rubbish pile in front of my home. It seemed that people were using that pile as a place of business to sell drugs and booze. An argument was brewing between two groups. Each group were wielding sticks and knives as makeshift weapons. One guy in Group A had a gun and shot someone in Group B, so someone in Group B stabbed gun guy in Group A. After that, a full-on fight ensued, with everyone in both groups joining in the fray. Within minutes, I heard approaching police sirens, which caused the fight to break up and both groups to run away, leaving the bleeding gun guy lying on the sidewalk. I tried to help him by staunching his bleeding. As I was doing so, I noticed a lottery ticket beside him with a letter saying that it was the winning ticket for $1 million payout. I froze. I looked around. No one was watching, so I acted, somewhat ignobly. Then I left quickly. If the police were to arrive and find me with the bleeding man, they might think that I had done it. I rushed home and fell into an easy chair, taking a deep breath of relief. While I was telling Dad about what had happened, there was a knock on the door. It was the Group A and B gangs. The spokesperson for the two groups held a knife in my direction and said, "Hand over the lottery ticket or die where you stand." Needless to say, I handed it over post-haste. But then he said, "I'm sorry, you've seen too much. You have to die." I pleaded, "But I didn't see anything, I swear." Suddenly, there was a flash from a camera, and the whole group of thugs began laughing. "You've been pranked," Dad said, as he stepped out from the crowd. My brothers were behind him laughing too. "You've been pranked," Dad said, as he stepped out from the crowd. My brothers were behind him laughing too. While relieved that my imminent death had been postponed, I was deeply saddened that I had lost my $1 million chance to get my dream factory. What rubbish.
I am Matthew, 21 years old, and I must tell you something. I am a madman. I need treatment. But what kind of treatment is there for my kind of madness? You see before you a man with torn clothes who speaks to himself all the time. I used to be a doctor, but I left medicine to pursue aromacology. In case you were wondering, aromacology is the study of fragrances, such as scents of flowers and how they affect people. Let me tell you my story. My parents were very proud of me because I was intelligent, well-known, and well-respected at my university. I earned high marks in all my courses. Dad wanted me to join the College of Medicine because he had always dreamed of my becoming a doctor, and I felt that I couldn't deny him that. My parents did their best to make me happy and to help me achieve Dad's dream. But to be honest with you, medicine, engineering, the arts, none of these interested me at all. They weren't my dream. I loved flowers and their fragrances, like rose and honeysuckle. I would extract fragrances from them and give them as gifts to my friends and family. They all really enjoyed these aromatic gifts. My dilemma was that I had to find a way to tell Dad that I would rather study botany, plants, and aromacology, fragrances, over medicine any day. I knew he would think that I was crazy to give up the lofty study of medicine to work with flowers, but what can I say? I have loved flowers and fragrances ever since I was a youngster. I have always been fascinated by exotic flowers and scents. Learning how to make fragrances from flowers required me to meet with a lot of people who worked in this field. One day, I had to face the moment I had been dreading because my parents had arranged a large social gathering to celebrate my success at the university and my joining the College of Medicine. Dad asked me to tell everyone about my ambitions as a doctor. I suddenly knew that the moment had come when I needed to make my startling announcement to my parents. I told the audience I had decided that being a doctor was not for me and that I was going to change my field of study. Dad looked at me with an astonished look on his face, and then he began laughing. He thought I was joking. Then I turned to him and said, "Dad, I'm not joking. I'm serious. I want to study flowers and fragrances, similar to the types of gifts I've given you before." The audience suddenly got very quiet. They could sense that this was an epiphany for my parents. The embarrassment and shock in the air was palpable. Dad looked at me and said with an affected smile, "Matthew, you were born to be a doctor. Forget all this nonsense about silly flowers." A little testily, I said, "Dad, extracting fragrances from flowers is not silly." Dad said, "Bah, forget about that." The party spirit was somewhat subdued after this testy exchange. Regardless, in deference to Dad, I began studying medicine, but most of my energy and attention was directed towards flowers and their fragrances. Sometimes I would spend time with my medical friends, and sometimes with my aromatology friends that I had met earlier. I spent my first year in medical college earning high marks as usual, but I had no passion for it. It neither excited nor interested me. There came a day when I had had my fill of medical studies and just couldn't take it anymore. So I decided to leave the College of Medicine to pursue my true passion, flowers and fragrances. When I told Dad of my decision, he was very upset, cursing at me and accusing me of being mad, insane, crazy. I repeated that I had zero interest in medicine and stated that the true madness was sticking with a field that I really didn't like at all. I moved away from home and stayed with a friend for a while before finally renting and moving into a small apartment. I faced a lot of obstacles in the beginning, but I didn't give up. I set up an arboretum by planting some flowers and nurturing them. I was working on a rare kind of fragrance extracted from a variety of flowers. I had to travel to obtain these specimens. My product fragrances weren't successful at first, but I persisted. Initially, I offered my fragrance products to various factories, but all refused my offer. So I continued in my studies. I worked in many different places. In the evenings, I would spend all my free time doing my experiments. Over time, I grew more proficient in producing unique fragrances. Then one day, I received a phone call from a famous factory. The factory owner told me that he might be interested in working with me, so I sent him some samples of my work, and they delighted him. And I was delighted that he was delighted. Thus began the lucrative stage of my new endeavor. I started earning a decent income and achieved a modicum of success in the end. After a while, I called Dad and asked him to forgive me, and he did, finally realizing that my passions were not necessarily his passions, and that I must pursue what I enjoyed the most. I have my own factory now. I achieved my dream in the end. My advice to you, the readers, is never to give up when pursuing your dreams. With persistence, you will be successful one day. So what do you think? Was I a madman to give up medicine for aromatology? Was I a madman to give up medicine for aromatology?
A suspicious mind can be a gift or a curse, depending on how a person uses it. Lend me your ears and listen to my story. My name is Sasha, and I am 21 years old. I have a suspicious mind. I see an Indian behind every tree. I suspect anyone and everyone of having ulterior motives and designs. If anyone makes any claim, I will research it to determine its veracity. If anyone looks at me, my mind goes through 10 different scenarios of what scheme that person is plotting to take advantage of me. I trust no one. So as you might imagine, I don't have many friends, and I've never had a boyfriend. I just naturally assume all people are two-faced scalawags. So without further ado, I will tell you that one day I was dumbfounded when I realized that I was falling in love with my neighbor Brandon. He was a weird, introverted guy who looked and behaved just like a vampire. Data gathering, you know. I noticed that I never saw him in the daylight, only at nighttime when he went to work. Like me, he didn't have many friends, and he didn't speak much. Everyone I knew agreed that he was definitely a weirdo. But there was something about him I liked. He was my cup of tea. I explored his Facebook page and concocted silly reasons to need to talk to him. We would meet and chat on numerous occasions, and I discovered that he liked me and was watching me too. He asked me to marry him one day, and I accepted immediately. It was difficult persuading my family that he was an okay guy, but I managed to convince them. I felt that he had a mysterious streak in his character, some dark secret in his life. But I was attracted to that and was okay with it. We prepared for our wedding reception. I did errands in the mornings and he did errands in the evenings. Then the night actually, came when we got married. As we spent more time together, I noticed that Brandon seemed very sensitive to bright lights. If any place were too well lit, he would make up an excuse and ask to leave. I noticed that his face was always pale. I noticed that his room at home had only a small lamp, and he liked his steaks exceedingly rare and bloody. Whenever he happened to see an injury, he would gaze hungrily at the oozing blood, just like I've seen in vampire movies. I truly wondered if he might be an actual vampire. One day I walked into his room, and when he looked up and saw me, his smile was creepy and eerie. I teased him and asked him not to hurt me, and he smiled. He offered to tell me a secret if I promised not to tell anyone. He told me that he had been hiding a dark secret for a long time, and he longed to share it with me. I held my breath. It was coming. He was going to confess to being a vampire. I was crestfallen when he instead told me that he had a rare illness that accounted for his pale face and rendered him sensitive to light. He said he was tired of keeping the secret to himself and felt relieved to have someone to share it with. I hugged him crying and told him that I didn't mind at all. And here I was so sure my husband was a vampire. Am I insane or what?